Welcome to episode 238 of The Numbers Game. I'm Jace. I'm here with Nick and Marty, and it's come to an end of a financial year. Accountants around Australia are, really just, they're celebrating. It's this time of year where, we go wild, we go crazy. Nick, Marty, how you doing? 30 June, what's up?
We're just trying to get through the days, mate. Not quite going crazy like you are. These accountants never ceases to amaze me.
We are a wild bunch. We are a wild bunch.
I think everyone seems to have an end of financial year party. It's I've never really understood it. The pessimist in me just thinks, shit, we've got to go again. We've just had a big year and now everything resets and we start from scratch.
Well, Nick, it is that kind of attitude that is where my idea for a bit of a conversation came today. We are resetting, we roll over, a new financial year starts again. If you're going back through the catalogue at the moment, we're rolling into the 2026 financial year, so it depends on when you've joined us and when you're listening to this episode. But it's always an interesting one. Over the last couple of weeks, we've had tax planning meetings out the wazoo. I got away to Torquay for a CPA retreat, and we had a bit of a pricing session where different people got up and spoke around how we price in professional services and just in industries in general. It could be the tradie who comes out to fix your toilet, like anything that requires pricing for a service or a good. So I thought what I'd bring to the table today is a bit of a conversation around how to price right heading into a new financial year and why now is a great time to review your numbers for the previous financial year. What revenue did you bring in? What were your variable costs and your fixed costs? And then what money was left over down the bottom for you, the business owner, to take home? And quite often, a lot of people will reflect back and go, there wasn't as much left over as I thought, or if for some, it's pretty disappointing to get to an end of financial year and have almost nothing left over for the business owner. So yeah, it's all about reviewing your pricing strategy, rethinking how you charge. I'll run through a few of the different ways that we do it and then hopefully future-proofing your profits. So Marty, I might throw to you, when we talk about pricing, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I think it depends on industry, but I know even in the consulting industry, people notoriously undercharge. They don't see their own value and they don't communicate that value openly in the market effectively, and it costs them. And they can be doing great work and not reaping the rewards of that. So I'm very, very conscious of that, and that's across a lot of different industries as well. So when you think about upping your pricing, again, you want to be communicating the value that comes with that as well. I think that's really important, but people undermine themselves sometimes. Not good. Well, what did you find out of the conference?
Well, basically, the conference just went through a few of the different ways that we bill. This was very much geared towards accounting and professional services, but ultimately it was around, the old school way of doing things is to come up with an hourly rate and literally just run the clock, hit your timesheet and bill an hourly rate. Now, the problem with that, sometimes that works. Some people are wildly successful at picking an hourly rate, billing for it. Lawyers, as an example, they've got a great hourly rate. They love punching the clock. They raise a bill no matter what they're doing for a client, and it's sent out weekly, fortnightly, monthly, depending on what they're doing. Unfortunately, for some business owners, they get the hourly rate wrong. They don't actually understand what goes into choosing how that hourly rate comes about. And, whereas for lawyers, there's quite a big margin in a sense of the hourly rate they choose is based on the value mixed in with the years of study, mixed in with the qualifications, mixed in with an amount of risk. So a lawyer charging $700 an hour, there's a bit more scope for getting the hourly price. Maybe it wasn't exactly where it needed to be, but the plumber or the chippy who's doing $100 an hour or $150 an hour, maybe they're not taking into consideration all the costs that go into running their business profitably to get there. So hourly billing was definitely one of them we ran through. Obviously, it's the easiest way to start, but it punishes efficiency, because if you're really good at your job and you get things done faster, you're actually making less money than maybe the same person down the road that takes an extra hour or two to charge for the same job. So hourly billing, while easy, punishes efficiency. And there's also unpredictable bills, which means unhappy clients. When you do an hourly rate job and say, hey, look, it might take 10 hours, but it might take 15. Let's say it took 20 and you raise a bill for a client. Doesn't really give happiness at the end of that job when you're telling someone, hey, it actually took me 20 hours instead of the 15 that I estimated. Here's the bill for that job. So hourly billing, it's a difficult one to get right.
Jace, I always say you can't fee what you can't see as a client. It's one of those things. There isn't anything worse than getting an additional bill for work that you didn't anticipate because it took longer. It's very, very frustrating. It's the same, like I say a lot of the time to mortgage brokers as well. And Nick, we talk about this all the time, but there's one thing in regards to selling a rate. There's another thing in regards to actually selling a dream and showing people how to save money on their mortgage outside of the rate and give additional value. And I think, I think sometimes that hourly rate can be a race to the bottom. But I do understand some industries, need to have it, and that's how they run. So, Nick, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, this is something we do. Obviously, mortgage broking, we can't dictate what we're paid, but financial planning we can. So for us, we're talking about a new financial year. We're going through that at the moment, as in our pricing, and for us, it's reverse engineering. So we know looking forward, what we expect to do this year. So we know what our staffing looks like. Our budgeted cash flows. We know how much we want to grow. So we know how many clients we're going to bring on, hypothetically, if everyone performs at a certain level, and then bring that back a bit to allow for some variables. And then we look at the net result. And if the net result from a profitability point of view is not where we need it, and where we need it is industry average, we're not chasing anything above industry average, then the business model doesn't work. And we need to change our pricing if nothing else can be changed. So, in most cases, it needs to be tweaked every year, just purely because wages cost more, rent goes up, insurance goes up, everything goes up. But we start with the end in mind, and then if we don't get to that right number, we revisit and charge that way, or change our fees.
Yeah, it's a perfect summary and wrap up of why we're having this conversation, and I like that. Except you've been in business a long time, Nick, so it's become part of your annual review process. You're at a point where, at a mature part of your business, you have forecasts, you have cash flows, you've got budgets prepared for the future year. So that is where you get this opportunity to do that. So at this point in time as well, rolling into a new financial year, it is the natural opportunity to do these reviews. You've got a full year of figures behind you. And then hopefully you're working with your advisor, business coach, accountant, financial advisor, anyone who's in your corner to help you map out your numbers for the year. And you're rolling forward the numbers to go, well, if all stays the same from a revenue point of view, let's say you don't move the needle, but as you said, wages go up, your rent goes up, our subscriptions have gone up. Every time we add a team member and you subscribe to a different file, a Slack account, an Outlook, so all of a sudden, if your business costs have gone up, cost of materials has gone through the roof. We've been looking at some of our construction clients, materials and supply costs, and it's just gobsmacking the way margins have been smashed, and for goods businesses and services business, it's out of control. So if you're not reviewing and increasing your prices, basically you're dying a slow and painful death in your business. So if that's what's happened, and you've got scope creep and cost rising, this is that opportunity. So we touched on before hourly billing, a few other different ways to go about it. You've also got fixed fee, which has become quite a buzz, especially in accounting and across several industries. It's a fixed fee for a service. So, for $1,000 a month, you get this list of services, no matter how big or how small or how many transactions, it's a fixed fee. And the business takes on a lot of risk with a fixed fee. So you set up an agreed scope, for the recurring services. Maybe it's bookkeeping, payroll for us, tax planning, accounting. Maybe for a business coach, it's X amount of meetings per month. And maybe for a web developer, it's X amount of hours fixing a website, whatever it is, social media. There's heaps of different businesses that do it. Where we see fixed fees go really wrong is getting the scope wrong at the start. You commit to doing something for a client, but then all of a sudden, the predictability is out of whack. You didn't see things coming. They doubled in size, and it makes for an awkward conversation if you've used the word fixed fee up front without talking about what happens if the scope changes. All of a sudden, you as a business owner and your team are copping the cost of somebody else's business doing really well. So you've got to build in boundaries up front to say fixed fee for X services, really, really well defined. And we've seen, not just in our profession, but across several different industries, fixed fee going really wrong. It has its time, it has its place, but it can get out of control. Nick, out of curiosity, do you work with an accounting firm that does fixed fee, or how are you setting that up?
Yeah, no, we're not fixed fee, as in us as the client, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah, no, we're definitely not fixed fee. I don't know. It's something you think about when you get your bills. You think, oh shit, is that too much? I don't know.
Yep.
But to me, it makes total sense because it's the same as what we do with planning. It's a fixed fee. But to your point, there's a scope that's articulated in the statement of advice when we bring clients on, and anything outside of that scope is charged at an hourly rate. We've got that hourly rate, in line with where it needs to be based on our net result. So I like the fixed fee, but I think with particularly your industry, you could all of a sudden you get 10 calls a week because they've got something going on,
Yep.
So yeah, I can see, but I also think it's good for the accounting group, right? Because it's like recurring revenue. It's easier for you to do your budgets and you know where you stand. So
Yeah, for sure. And look, one of the languages or one of the words that we've tried to move away from fixed fee, but use the word retainer. We're retained for a certain amount per month to do a list of services. But in the event the client does call 10 times because something's blowing up for them that month, we're on a retainer. So we just have to have that conversation, which again comes down to, we've done a lot of sales training or sales episodes before where we talk about why the importance of sales is and farmers versus hunters. So, your team need to be well trained on how to have these conversations and not to make it feel like it's a dirty or negative thing. Is that if you're providing value and doing an extra service for someone, there's a value exchange, which is where the business needs to be paid for the service and the value that is being outlaid to a customer. So that's so far hourly billing and fixed fee, which then leads us into your value-based pricing or project costs. Or project pricing, I should say. There's a few different industries use different words for it, but ultimately from a value pricing point of view, you're talking to a customer about doing a job. And then rather than doing, okay, well, my hourly rate is a couple $100 an hour, it's going to take me 5 hours. It's thinking about what is the value to be able to pull this job off for someone. So for us in our profession, a few different things. I'll use an example of a small business restructure. If we're able to assist a client to restructure their debts, potentially with the HEO as an example, let's say they owe the HEO $300,000, and through this process, we can help them negotiate the debt down to $100,000. We use easy numbers. We've worked with a partner to save them $200,000, but maybe our involvement was 10 hours. So 10 hours at $200, let's say, should I raise a $2,000 invoice if I was on an hourly billing? Or if I'm saving a client $200,000, should I value base that project for the value that my team and my knowledge and my expertise is bringing to the party? So that is obviously one where you'd go to take on the risk of that project, to work closely with the client and take that on and be available on call at all hours of the day. Maybe that should be a $10,000 value-based project rather than $2,000 an hourly rate. Thoughts on that, Marty, from a value-based pricing for projects?
Definitely. I like that. I like a percentage ratio on particularly a proactive, delivery on something that's going to save me as the client a lot of money. I'd be very open to that, and I wouldn't hesitate because I wouldn't expect that I'd get that result initially. So to me, something like that is interesting, and I would definitely be open to something like that.
So question, Marty, because I think there's a grey area here, and first thing I'll say is I agree with what you're saying, but how would you feel if Jace, let's say you went through a small business restructure and I went through a small business restructure?
Yep.
Similar amount of work. Jace got me out of $500K in tax and he got you out of $300K in tax.
Yeah.
He charges on a percentage base, so he charges me 2%, charges me 10 grand.
Yeah.
He charges you, what did I say, 300? Charges you 6. So do you think that's how it should work, or do you think Jace would say small business structure, irrelevant of the saving, is this amount of value, so this is the fixed price for a small business restructure because it's touch and go, I might not get it done, I'm going to have to do a lot more hours? Or do you think it should be, because I've heard, this is pretty shonky stuff in your industry, Jace, but I've heard about accountants charging based on the refund, which is crazy, right? Because it means they're incentivized to go into grey areas or possibly break rules to get more money.
Yeah, the refund one is definitely from an ethics and integrity point of view. We see those ones. I mean, I work with the CPA and with Xero and, trying to uplift my profession to talk about the right ways to go about it. The ones that talk about taking a percent of a refund, they are ones where you just got to really tread carefully, because if they're encouraging, hey, you should claim extra for your motor vehicle. Oh, you could claim more of your mobile phone. Like if you're being encouraged to claim more because there's a bigger refund for you, which means a bigger fee for someone else, they're the ones that you have to be, very, very careful of. But I mean, look, that could also work with small business restructure, Nick, in the same way. If the person you worked with was trying to be too aggressive because there's a bigger upside to doing a deal for less cents to the dollar to the ATO, which means more cost reduction, which means more fees to the people involved. You'd have to, I mean, look, comes ethics and integrity. You've got to be able to do the right thing to show your value to the end person that you're working with.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because again, you see real estate agents sometimes I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do it. If you get me this much on the price, it's worth this much commission. But if you get over this, there's an extra 2% or 5% or whatever the case may be. So I guess when I hear Jace talking about it, I'm thinking more like a commercial benefit. And if he's got the skill sets to represent that benefit in the best light for me, particularly against the tax man, but I take your point, Nick. I think there is a grey area, and having asked the question, I'd probably prefer Jace to give me a fixed price because it's going to be cheaper, right? Yeah. But I would, as a business to business person, I would actually say go all in because I probably wouldn't have been aware that that was available to me. So I'd honour the expertise on that.
Yep. I think one of the quotes that kind of comes up is, not necessarily charging for time, but charging for transformation. So in that particular example, what is the size and scale of the value or transformation? What have we saved a client by being able to do something like that? And the other side of it, there's this again, just talking about my particular profession, but when you think about it from other professions out there, there are ways that there is value being exchanged that is worth more than just an hourly rate. But again, so when we start to think about that hourly billing, fixed fees or retainers, and then value-based pricing, realistically, you should be kind of trying to think about a hybrid model. You've got to be able to work out that different services and different things you do probably need to be priced in certain ways. So you might have hourly billing for your bread and butter. For me, for example, tax returns, financials, bread and butter. It's not rocket science. Hopefully at some point in time, AI really gets good at this and we can start letting AI do more of it, and then the humans do more of the review, which means then we have more time to deliver value by having conversations with clients, communicating with them about the results, how it got there, giving advisory as part of that service rather than kind of doing a tax return and financials as a separate job and then charging more for advisory over here. Hopefully we can start to use the spend that a customer would spend with us, to be able to do more advisory work, which is, again, more high value, gets them towards their goals quicker than what it would be without. So flowing on from a bit of an understanding about the different price rates, I mean, what I wanted to use was a real life example because I think that often helps. And this real life example is actually one that is as simply just using the hourly rate method, but making sure a client has gone through understanding their variable costs and their fixed costs. So we had a plumbing client and we've gone through a scenario and this kind of used a bit of an example here to not go too specific, but this particular plumbing group had 15 plumbers that were out working. And we reviewed their hourly rate and we went from a $160 per hour average charge out across the team and said, well, what would happen if you went to $170 per hour? Do you think you'd lose any work? And went and did it, tested it a few, quoted on jobs and clients, and not a single job was lost. So again, I actually challenged that you should continue to raise your price until people start saying no, especially with supply and demand in particular industries where people need work done. And if they're calling up saying, hey, I need you to get in, especially like emergency plumbing work, I think, again, all of a sudden there's a value in emergency plumbing work rather than just the hourly rate. But for the sake of the example, we helped move a client with 15 plumbers from $160 per hour to $170 per hour. Now, Marty, I don't know if you've looked at the notes or not, but how much difference do you think it made to the bottom line, keeping all else the same for this particular business? How much extra profit do you think was on the bottom line at the end of the year?
Depends how many jobs they did per, but I would say there'd be probably a 10 to 15% increase on revenues and maybe 5% on profit.
Nice
but I
one.
haven't done the numbers.
No, all good, good. If you'd done the numbers, you would have just given me an answer. And it would have been no fun to unpack this. So on that, what we've worked out is, from a full-time team member, you're looking at around 1,976 hours. So we've worked out admin, travel time, and used 1,600 hours. Nick, what have you worked out? You're going to have a go.
250 grand.
Ho ho! Winner. It's almost bang on. Well done.
Did you put that on the calc, did you?
What do you got for me? Oh, he's done it on paper too. He's not mucking around. So
It's not hard. 40 hours a week per plumber at $10. It's another $400 a week. 52 weeks in a year. It's 20 grand a year. 15 plumbers, give or take.
ended up with a similar result, but we've pulled back for annual leave, sick leave, different bits and pieces, and worked it all out. But each plumber can add additional revenue. So 15 plumbers add, and they charge out 272,000 instead of 256,000. So revenue goes from 3.84 million to 4.08 million, adding 240,000 to the revenue. Again, this is assuming that nothing else changed for that year. They've just put their rates up, and everybody, obviously some rents and things will change, but to have a $240,000 increase in revenue for the sake of a $10 change in your charge out rate. So that's how big the needle can move when you start to think about that. And this is not to say that there can't be project-based pricing on top of that as well. As I said, this particular plumbing business does emergency call-out work. So maybe the emergency call-out work has a service fee and a call-out fee attached to it. So where there is supply and you are in control of the demand, you've got a bit of power on your side. But I wanted to share that as an example that if it's not something you regularly do, if each year you're not reviewing your prices and looking at your costs going up and what profitability you're dropping to the bottom line, if you don't understand your margins, if you're not benchmarking other people in your profession or your industry, it is a big missed opportunity. So yeah, from my side, that's the way you've got to go. It's a great reminder. We do it ourselves in business. Nick, it sounds like you do as well. And then Marty, I'm sure you've worked with plenty of business owners that haven't done it or that they need to do it.
Oh, it's a power of one. Like, sometimes 1% increase and 1% cut on costs, all these 1%ers can make a dramatic impact on the bottom line. It's just not looked at as often enough as it needs to be.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that example just demonstrates the importance, particularly for bigger businesses, because when you've got scale, a little tweak that clients won't even notice or question has a massive result to the bottom line. On the flip side, if you don't do it based on scale, you're creating a bigger and bigger problem.
Bang on, Nick. And what you've talked about there is as you scale as a business, which again, I'm sure you've faced and then we've also faced as well, as you start to scale, you start to add admin or marketing or vehicles or phone allowances, or you kind of keep adding expenses as you try and scale that may not be chargeable expenses that end up seeing the price per hour or the top line revenue. If you then add an extra admin team member or client services team member who's not chargeable because you've got more team members and you're trying to look after more clients, sometimes people aren't factoring that in. So yeah, scale's a big one. And as you said, it drives bigger results when you do have more billable team members or more chargeable team members out there generating goods or services. Or sort of services. This is a service-based business, but it's another one to think about for, we do a lot of work with e-commerce as well. So we're looking at sometimes, e-commerce businesses will focus on what they're spending on their, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Google ads. But at the same time, it's also when they think about their sales strategy, when they put out a discount code, is there an opportunity to actually say, well, my product is highly sought after, but it's been $49 for 5 years. Can I put that up to 59, but, make sure that I'm still hitting the right metrics from a sales point of view. So there are different things that you got to think about beyond not just professional services, but somebody who sells goods as well needs to do the same pricing strategy, but it's more goods focused and looking at the metrics, the materials, the cost of goods, the advertising. There's more line items to review, but it's all important to understand your numbers at a deep granular level.
I've got a question on the conference, and this really comes from what Marty brought up around the business coaches. So firstly, an observation, and an observation is particularly if you're a professional service, sometimes having a larger fee can actually be a benefit apart from the money because it shows value, it shows expertise. If someone charges a lot of money, straight away you think, well, this person, particularly been referred to them, this person knows what they're doing and they've got credentials or they can back up with results. So I think that's something to be mindful of too. If you do appear cheap, it can actually hinder your ability to sign people up.
Mm-hmm.
On what did you talk about methodology behind value pricing? Because where do you start? So, Marty's going on the business coaching journey now. Where do you start in understanding, well, what is value? Because if it's not numbers based, it's kind of based on experience and what I can provide.
I can give you a real life example of it because I'm in the trenches of that at the moment. But you're right, Nick. You bring up a great point because no one wants a cheap coach.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But you still have to demonstrate value. And this is not to flute my own horn here, but this is sort of how I've had to sort of put it in my own head in regards to that value. So to me, like I would do for 750 grand of revenue in a business, I'd do a flat fee and under around 3,300 a month, right? Which is about 4 to 5 billable hours, but obviously some work behind the scenes. And and then there's a sandwich board of what you get for that number of hours and everything like that. Now, once you go over 750, I look at 6% of revenue and I model that out over the year. And then I break it down into monthly figures. Now, the reason I do that is to then go, all right, if we're working together over a month or over a quarter, then we've got certain goals we want to hit in regards to revenues and what we want to accomplish that is much more valuable than that 6%, right? So I have to showcase not only my experience, like being a managing director, being a sales director, building businesses, like, being a life coach, being a business coach. I have to build that premise, right, as a strength of foundation. But then I also have to go, I've got to be excited enough to work with this business and be able to help this business to attain the result. Now, if I'm taking a business from 750 grand turnover at 12.5%, let's say profitability, to then over the course of 18 months to 2 years, whatever the time frame is that we're working towards. But if I'm taking that to 1.5 million in turnover with 20% profitability, and all of a sudden that's now that business, instead of being worth 400 grand, is now worth 1.2 mil or 1.6 mil, then they're not going to worry about my fee, right? So I have to build in the outcomes we want to attain as a collective, as a strategic partner, not just the old term business coach or advisor. For me, that's the only way I can, first of all, demonstrate value and capability based on what I've done, but also then set the premise of what we're going to accomplish. And if we don't achieve it, there's got to be consequences to that in regards to the fee, and then the fee like being renegotiated if it's ongoing, right? But if we're hitting our metrics and we're performing at new levels, then that coaching fee goes up. Now I'm incentivized, the business owner's incentivized, and that sort of it just takes away the whole monotony around the whole industry that's trying to charge $220 an hour doing nothing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just putting a business scope on it. So there's a little bit of a methodology about being in the trenches of building it out. And again, you don't deliver, you don't get paid at the end of the day.
That lens you've just done then, a business turning over 750 at 12.5%, they got 93,750 profit. Within 2 years, if you can double that business to 1.5 million turnover, 20%, they got 300,000 profit. Their business is also worth more. So they've been able to make an extra 210,000 in 1 year later on for working with someone that's cost them $36,000 a year as a hypothetical. So yeah, that value exchange, I look at that and go, maybe depending on the multiple of the industry they're in, maybe you're not charging enough, as an example.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the thing. I need to exceed value, right? I need to exceed the value that I'm charging, and that's okay. But it's, again, then you've got to demonstrate that in regards to putting together the numbers of how we're going to do it. And like you said, Jace, you're backtracking that number to what the performance metrics need to be, and then you start from the beginning to start that road. And
correct.
if you can demonstrate that, then you've got something.
And getting runs on the board as well, so that you've got case studies and proof of concept. I mean, the prices that Greg and I charged as two mates running a small accounting firm doing individual tax returns versus two mates running a team of 30, looking after some of the best businesses in Australia. It's a very different pricing model of how we do it. But ultimately, Nick, to go back to your question, really what you're paying for is experience, knowledge, and results. And if somebody's got a really great resume that if they were working on a job as an executive, they might be on $500,000 or $1 million a year salary, but you're getting a fraction of that person's time, I would expect you'd be paying a fraction of that person's time at $1 million annual fee. So, if you reverse engineer that as well to say, if that person values their time and they're working as a consultant in your particular field, but if they went and got a job for a big business, what would they be getting paid? There's also the way to kind of work that trade-off out as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Marty's circumstance, because here's the thing: value is perceived differently by different people.
Correct.
It's like someone says, "What's the house worth?" Well, it's worth what someone's willing to pay on the day, which is why things go to auction. So, if you're someone like Marty, for example, Marty's got a certain quota or a certain amount of hours that he's dedicated to working. He builds some case studies and he gets some results. It will be then a matter of saying, well, this is the amount of hours I've got in the day. I'm going to do my best to maximize my earning capacity in those hours. So this is my fee. And then if I've got a full schedule, then people are prepared to pay that fee. There's people that see value in that. So I think, and there's a good friend of ours, who I know went through this process, but started in a consulting gig, quickly worked out that people would almost pay double than what he was charging. And it was purely just perceiving the perception of what he thought he was worth versus what everyone else thought he was worth when he started adding the value. And when you fill your books really quickly, you're probably too cheap.
Yeah, that's notorious throughout the consulting industry. Really, what you're saying right there. And you like you said, as long as you can model out an outcome, and of course you're going to look to try and exceed it anyway to deliver additional value, but as long as you can model out an outcome that's very, very beneficial, then I think you have to be more outcome focused. And you also have to, you do have to build awareness of your strengths and capabilities and pick the right clients. Like you said in the past, Chase, it's like, I don't want to pick people that are struggling. I want to pick really great people that want to go further, because I can amplify with those people. I can really achieve a lot faster. If someone's really been struggling for a lot of years, then that's a hard drag through the mud, right? So to me, even your client selection becomes really important, that that everyone's winning out of the situation.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and as an episode called, a podcast called The Numbers Game, I often think, we talk about numbers too much sometimes, especially in accounting. Pricing, while you need to understand your numbers and the metrics that go behind it, sometimes it's not just about the numbers, but it's about, how you position the value you bring, the confidence in the way you deliver that, and then the value you bring to the table. As you said, Martin, if you help a business owner to be $200,000 more profitable 2 years after they work with you, that is huge outcome. It's not just about the effort, but the shift in mindset. So that cost becomes an investment. So, anyone out there who has listened to this episode, this is your opportunity to stop, go back and look at your pricing, look at the cost of your business and think about how much money you're making and whether you need to move the needle and, pull some levers. If you do need a hand, any of us here at The Numbers Game are happy to help. Reach out, get in touch. We want you to back yourself and understand what you are truly worth and get some transformation happening in your business. Until next time.
Cheap price, cheap results. Game over.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The conversations are of a general nature and do not qualify as financial or tax advice. We recommend before you make any financial decisions, you consult a licensed professional. Individuals on the podcast may hold positions in the companies discussed.